All right. Good evening. Welcome to LaRouche PAC's Saturday Night Class Series. I'm Susan Kokinda, and tonight I'm joined by Brian Lance, who is going to be presenting a really critical overview of the kinds of concepts we have to understand and the kinds of steps we're going to have to take, very revolutionary steps we're going to have to take to save our country from the economic destruction which is being brought down upon our heads right now by Joe Biden and by his globalist masters. But in order to do that, to address the fundamental question of how are we going to fix this, I think the first thing that we have to ask, or the first question we have to answer, is where did this come from? Now, Joe Biden would like you to think that it's coming from Vladimir Putin. I think most people on this call, and probably most people who are watching our YouTube channel, know that is not the case. It's very clear that Biden and the globalists, the imperial elite, they wanted this confrontation. As a matter of fact, they had the sanctions planned as far back as last November. There are strategic reasons for it, using Ukraine as a sacrificial lamb to try and carry out regime change in Russia. There are domestic political reasons for it, because prior to the Ukrainian conflict, as we all know, it was clear that the global elite were in the process of losing control of the United States, that the rejection of Biden's policies and the Democrats was spreading like wildfire. And they were looking at a complete rout in 2022 and their worst nightmare, which is the return of Donald Trump in 2024. And what they have unleashed, both by trying to change the agenda to the war narrative, but more fundamentally, as Brian is going to develop, carrying a full-out assault on the US economy with this sanctions policy, and with the very dangerous potentiality that the dollar could end up losing its status as the world's reserve currency, the consequences of which are beyond dramatic. That is one of the causes, or the most immediate cause of the economic crisis that we're looking at. But in a certain sense, it's not even sufficient to blame Biden and his policies since they came in. Obviously, they have done tremendous damage to our economy, and they threaten to do much more damage to our economy. But one of the things which characterized Lyndon LaRouche is that he always looked at the longer sweep of history, and he looked at the deeper underlying causes. Because to understand where we are right now and the kind of dramatic changes that we're going to have to make if we're going to save our nation, you have to go back to much more fundamental root causes. Now, preliminarily, I would take that back to 1913 with the establishment of the Federal Reserve System, when essentially we took the first gigantic step in giving up our economic sovereignty and handing it over to a bunch of private bankers as part of what was really a British-run global central banking system. We abandoned the policy of national banking and economic development, which had characterized this nation in the decades after Abraham Lincoln, and which had characterized us in earlier decades due to as a result of the policies of Alexander Hamilton. So, I mean, in a sense, we've been in this central banking system since 1913. There have been several devolutions, if you will, of that central banking system over the decades. Perhaps one of the most dramatic was in 1971, which Lyndon LaRouche forecast that there was going to be a major crisis in the system which was run was in the international financial system. And when Richard Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system and took the dollar off the gold reserve standard, and we subsequently allowed the value of our currency to float, thereby giving up sovereignty over our currency, that was another major shift in the control of the global financial elite, of this central bankers run system over our country. That was over 50 years ago. And at that time, Lyndon LaRouche warned that if we did not reverse that action, if we did not push back against the increasing control of the central bankers over our economy, that at the end of this process, we would end up with the threat of fascism. Now, for those of us who heard him say that way back in 1971, was a very shocking statement. But look at where we are now. This is exactly where we are. And what I want to really stress with people is that there is no going back to the good old days. Well, there's no going back to any good old days of the 1950s or Ronald Reagan, or even the valiant efforts of Donald Trump to rescue our economy. If we are going to survive at this point, we have to end the system of central banking. We have to get rid of this system, and we have to reestablish policies which are based on the fundamental principles of the American system. And just as Donald Trump, his movement, and all patriots are fighting to reestablish our political sovereignty, that same movement also has to fight to reestablish our economic sovereignty. And what Brian is going to go through tonight is a discussion of the immediate crisis before us and the immediate steps that need to be taken toward the end of creating an entirely new system. But briefly, before I turn it over to Brian, I just want to point out to people some things, if I can get them on my screen, just a minute. In a certain sense, a prelude to tonight's discussion is last week's class by Bob Ingram, which is here on the website, entitled LaRouche's Economic Revolution. This was an extraordinarily rich discussion of the principles that Lyndon LaRouche put forward and how you would apply them to putting the Federal Reserve into bankruptcy and creating a third national bank of the United States. A really extraordinary discussion which people should avail themselves of. The top post at the moment is Barbara Boyd's strategic overview of where the war hawks in the uniparty, neocons, neolibs, rhinos, the entire collection of creatures up there, is doing a very good imitation of Dr. Strangelove in the way that they're approaching the conflict in Ukraine. So it's a very good strategic overview. And then finally, I want to point out this article, The City of London's Murderous Sanctions Policy Targeting the American People. Brian, who's about to speak, does a preliminary rundown of what they have done to us. And last but not least, I want to make sure that people who may be joining us for the first time or viewing this subsequently on YouTube go to the Follow Us tab up in the upper right-hand corner and make sure that you're following us on social media, YouTube, and signed up for all of our newsletters, emails, and weekly events. So with that, Brian, go ahead and unmute yourself and take it away.
All right, thank you, Susan. Good to be here. Good to be back. Well, let me start out by referencing an announcement made by way of a Sputnik News. It was actually originally released in Russian, but then, of course, then got translated here and there and circulated. which is that the Eurasian Economic Union has started the process of establishing a new financial settlement system with China. The Eurasian Economic Union is Russia. It's also the STAN countries, Belarus, Armenia. You get the idea. And then in conjunction with China creating a new settlement mechanism based on an indexing of the various currencies, obviously centering around the ruble and the yuan, and but also the other currencies, and also commodities, hard commodities. So we'll come back to that. That's a regional block settlement system. The first outline of this is expected to be published in 2 weeks. So we'll see. We don't know a lot of details about it, but we'll come back to it later in the discussion. Everything's in flux, and this is very much goes to what Susan was saying about the dollar and the danger of the dollar losing its standard as the accepted means of international settlement, of financial settlement, the dollar's central role in international finance. But I would underscore then what, again, to really just take an aspect of what Susan was just saying. We're in a war, but the war is a war to save a system of sovereign nation states. And the enemy in this war is an oligarchical system. That is the central banking system that currently runs down the world economy at this moment. And it's getting rid of the central banking system that is absolutely critical. I mean, we're at the end of a system, as Susan and I were talking about just a few moments ago. We're at the end of the system. So, I'm here. I was asked to discuss the economy, the U.S. economy in particular. That was one request in terms of kind of pre-discussions. So that's what I'm going to focus on. But look, everything is in flux. I mean, people saw this this Biden laptop. Well, now the New York Times is admitting the Biden laptop is real. So what does that mean? That that's now leaked out into the or released out into the public? What are the ramifications of that? So there could be a lot of changes happening very fast. So it's very unpredictable, but I want to emphasize the most important thing is ourselves and the role we play as American citizens, and particularly in conjunction with LaRouche PAC. We are uniquely qualified. We're here at this conjuncture. Really, thank God we're here at this this conjuncture. And we have Donald Trump. We have the Trump mega movement and really a broader movement around that to take the country back. And our proposals, our policy for a third national bank, ridding the country of the central banking system, as other nations need to do as well. A economic recovery program for the United States in terms of the physical economy of the United States. It provides the program, the means by which the power that's coming together, the power of the American people in support of the Constitution can actually be realized again. So this is a unique moment, and we're uniquely positioned to win this war. So let me turn then to what's going on with the U.S. economy. Just some features. And of course, the sanctions, broadly speaking, has been a body blow. It's disrupted global trade. It's created all kinds of supply chain constraints and fears. I'll just mention a few examples in a second, but with the freezing of the accounts of the Russian central bank, with the taking Russia out of the SWIFT system, which is really not that important in and of itself. But all of these measures combined have created a situation where every country, every bank around the world fears that they could be next. The dollar is the basis of international trade. If the US is sanctioning countries anywhere in the globe involved in trade that some way or another, indirectly or directly, could be a violation of these ever-changing layer upon layer of sanctions, they could be up the creek. So every banker, every insurance company, I think of Lloyd's of London or something, that insuring merchant ships, brokers, brokering oil, grain, whatever. Who can they ship to? Who's not sanctioned? Individuals, not just countries. In other words, they're watching out. They're looking in the rearview mirror. They're trying to see around the corner. They don't know what's coming next. And this has exploded the markets. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is all of this is exactly what fuels the speculative process, the predatory speculative process, which the central bank serves. This is an oligarchical, predatory system of looting. The central banks just don't manage paper. They are they grease the wheels of a speculative, predatory system that preys on the physical economy, the production, the lives, the future generations of this nation. So let's look at some of the impacts of this. Well, we know oil, you know the price of gas, but gas was last 2 weeks ago was $130 a barrel. Now it's down to around $104 a barrel. Tomorrow it could be back up again. The volatility here is an extreme feature. And this is exactly the opposite of what's required for a productive economy. If you're going to make capital investments into farms, into industry, you need stable financial conditions, economic conditions. Well, it's the opposite of that. Natural gas produces ammonia. Fertilizer prices have doubled, quadrupled in some areas of the country. Russia is a primary source, 20–30% of potash, ammonia, urea for fertilizer. So as a result, prices are going up. Related to that, cotton. Think of cotton. 75% of clothing is made out of cotton. Well, it takes twice as much nitrogen, potash, to produce cotton as other crops. Well, that means the price of cotton is going up. Well, it's gone up, 8 cents. It's up to $1.28 or something like that a pound. Now up 8%. That's roughly in a week, 8 days. All right. The drought is another factor hitting the cotton industry, cotton growers, as you can imagine. The growing drought, particularly in the West, but spreading east. So there's other factors in this. You look at metal. I mean, we can talk about wheat. Wheat's been up, 50%. So sugar, dairy is up 26%. Cereals are generally up 30%. That's according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Global. These are the global prices. And it's important to keep that in mind. We've created this deregulated, financialized financial economic system where the price, of cereal isn't something determined in Texas, where I'm talking to you from, or in Michigan, or even in Paris. In effect, it's in the cloud somewhere. It's in global financial markets, trading floors, and so forth. In terms of metals, take nickel for stainless steel, batteries, lithium batteries, and so forth. Nickel, well, that's Russia is a huge chunk of the entire nickel production of the exported production in the world. The price went from $25,000 a ton to $100,000 a ton, reaching that peak last Tuesday, a week ago last Tuesday. The London Metals Exchange, the quaint old London Metals Exchange, shut down nickel trading for a week, and they're only haphazardly opening it ever since. The price is dropping now in nickel. $8 billion was out on the, was basically $8 billion in losses, was threatening nickel producers, speculators. There's particulars to this, it's all in the financial press, but it's an example, again, of this volatility and the inability to control what's been unleashed. It's a little bit like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, if you remember that, or saw the Disney movie with that name. But this is what's going on. So the consequences of this, just in brief, is inflation. This is inflation, but again, this is, well, let me give you a couple of examples here, different kind of example of some of the fallout of this. It's not like the quote unquote speculators are on top of this game either. On March 16th, that was just a couple of days ago, a few days ago, on March 16th, the European Federation of Energy Traders, this includes British Petroleum, Shell, commodity traders like Trafigura, this is some of the Swiss gnomes and whatnot. They released a letter. This was published in the Financial Times of London, all right, saying that they required a time-limited emergency liquidity support operation to ensure that wholesale gas and power markets continue to function. Right? Since the end of February 2022, that's two and a half weeks ago, an already challenging situation has worsened, and more energy participants are in a position where their ability to source additional liquidity is severely reduced, or in some cases exhausted. Okay, they're facing bankruptcy. All right, a chain reaction process. This is a zero-sum game. This is not the real world of physical economy where you can grow the production of the world. This is the world of shortages. The sanctions policy has created more shortages and therefore more basis for speculation. Well, for every winner, there's a loser in this game, a zero-sum game. And so as a consequence, there's these pleas. This plea is for central bank support into the clearinghouse banks that support the trading platforms in Europe to just keep it functioning. This is like I said, this was March 16th. Okay, this is ongoing. No one knows all the ramifications of what's going on now, the shockwave effects, if you will, around the globe. So I wanted to bring that forward. What we've got here is a concatenation. I mean, it is the end of the system, but think about it. You have the energy shock, commodities shock, hard commodities, prices going through the roof. Really, commodities are turning the value of the dollar and other currencies, not the other way around. You have the Green New Deal, ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance policies being imposed on corporations. It's the woke culture. But it's also BlackRock and Vanguard and the index trading funds and their pressure on corporate boardrooms. You have the fundamental stranglehold of the Federal Reserve, ongoing stranglehold on the real economy. The central banks like the Federal Reserve They don't lend into production, as we've discussed in the recent presentations on a national bank over the last 3 weeks. The Federal Reserve and other central banks lend to a small group of banks in the United States are called primary dealers. The number varies. Right now, it's somewhere around 24. It's been as high as 49. But anyway, this is Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, also some brokerage houses. They lend to them. They lend into speculation. That's where their money goes, whether it's currencies, raw materials, anything that can be speculated on, quick turnover, high rates of return, and where otherwise not available, they park their money at the treasuries, in treasuries. So you have the Federal Reserve, you know, has continued to squeeze and reduce the actual physical output of the commodities and the products that then those commodities are turned into. Here in the United States, we see this. We ran a trade deficit of, in terms of actual goods, physical goods, last year of $1 trillion in international trade. We exported about 1.5 trillion. We imported 2.5 trillion. And that's what's choking up the so-called supply chains to move $1 trillion worth of goods coming primarily through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Why? Because we're not producing here. And the credit isn't available. The financing isn't available to build that productive capacity in the United States under the existing central bank system of the Federal Reserve. That points in the direction of the solutions. That's the important thing. There are solutions here. If we identify effectively the cause and causes, then you're also on your way to finding a solution, as in curing a disease. So then we have, I've already really referenced it, we have another layer of this thing. That's the physical breakdown, not just the non-production of what should be produced, but the breakdown of existing production. Under the control of Wall Street, the City of London, this kind of central banking regime of predatory finance, you know, corporations long ago went to just-in-time production. They went to lean manufacturing. They didn't maintain inventories. And then, of course, post-COVID, there's this massive breakdown in terms of the supply chains, as I referenced really briefly. And so these guys are hung out to dry, lacking semiconductors. But now for the automobile industry, which is now at about 40% of capacity, operating at 40% roughly. But it's not just semiconductors, palladium, you know, for catalytic converters, and so on and so forth. This is not available. In Europe, the electrical harnesses for the electrical systems in the cars for VW and other companies, largely built in Ukraine. Guess what? They're not being produced now. So auto plants are idle. So you have this physical economic breakdown. You have the breakdown of energy production under environmental restrictions, care of the Biden Collective and the Green New Deal. You have the Federal Reserve strangulation, which all of this serves, and all of it is serving to feed a predatory system, you know, where the cancer is consuming the host. And that's the Malthusian agenda at rock bottom in terms of the Great Reset, the World Wildlife Fund, and so on and so forth. They're bringing about this collapse of sovereign nation states, you know, to impose a new globalized dark age, if they had their way. So I think I've indicated some of the aspects here. I want to introduce a short story here. Here in Texas, there's a oil man. His name is Audrey Stevens. He owns a company out in Midland, Texas called Endeavor. I think it's Endeavor Resources. And there's another gentleman, Curtis Mewbourne. He's in Tyler, Texas. That's on the eastern side in the Piney Woods. Now, Audrey is 84. Curtis is 86. Between their two companies, Mewbourne Energy and Endeavor, they're now they're now operating a total of 33 oil and gas drilling rigs in the United States. Here's the shocker. That's more than Chevron and Standard Oil combined. These two independent oil producers, who as Stevens recently told the Wall Street Journal, who has gone through several near-death experiences in the ups and downs, the boom and busts of the oil industry. These guys are producing more oil than the big energy producers combined. But there's also another feature to this, just to be clear. Well, first, 62% of the 734 active U.S. oil and gas rigs operating right now are operated by private companies like Endeavor and Mewbourne. Okay, so keep that in mind. But the other feature that even the Wall Street Journal article, which was published on March 17th, pointed out, the large publicly traded energy companies, as well as those controlled by private equity firms, have been cautious about ramping up drilling. They are feeling pressure from investors who prefer dividends and stock buybacks. And rather than, it goes on, ambitious and expensive drilling plans after suffering profit disappointments during past boom markets. Okay, so the pressure from Wall Street, equity funds, you know, BlackRock, et cetera, right, is squeezing the production. But what's coming through is a handful of small oil producing companies that are actually drilling and producing the oil and gas. Now those people are exceptions. Those people are exceptions. That's great. But for the US economy to function, we've got to have a functioning national banking system, a national banking system that provides credits so that many more of these productive people out there, entrepreneurs in many areas of the economy, can produce. You know, the exception right now, those that have managed their way through numerous near-death experiences has to become the norm. And I want to emphasize, you do this, you know, you do this by creating a system of national banking centered around a national bank, which is extending credit. There's a problem. Third National Bank. A problem with the name Third National Bank is you say Third National Bank and people think you're talking about a bank. You're talking about money. No, the problem is money, right? We're not building the future right now. We're investing in futures. That's what the economy is doing. It's all about money and shortages and speculation, as I think I've indicated. What you need instead is credit extended to the productive areas of the economy. And we presented that over the last 3 weeks, and I really encourage you to look at those videos lined up there that on the webpage, if you haven't already. I want to emphasize there's no way you can create a monetary system or a system that is just going to work hands-free. The critical feature in making a national bank function is the intention of the American people. The American people have to make a third national bank function for the sake of the nation, for the future of the nation. that's cultural. That's a cultural issue. That's a question of moral character. This is absolutely essential. It's not like you can create a third national bank and walk away from that either, and it'll just take care of itself. No, we have to guide it. The American people have to create the future. So this is I just think essential to thinking about the whole business. If we take the economy, the national economy of the United States right now, we can look at a number of key areas, and the material that I've authored that are there on the website develops some of that. The January 28th issue on notes on steps to needed now to re-Americanize the real economy. The February 7th article on the Reconstruction Finance Corporation under Roosevelt, which was a carrying forward of many of the principles of Hamilton and Lincoln's policies, follows that up and gives examples of what we did to get out of the Depression in the 1930s, how we built up the infrastructure of the nation. So I point you in that direction. But today we can highlight a few things. Energy. We need somewhere between 200, 300 gigawatts of nuclear power in the United States to double or triple manufacturing. Only about 8.7% of our workforce is employed in manufacturing. If you take the entire industrial area of the US economy, it's around 20%. That includes heavy industry, cement, mining, et cetera, that feeds into the process, that provides the hard commodities into the manufacturing process. But that's only the raw material. It's the creative minds then of the engineers, the manufacturing workers, and so forth that turns this into vital products. That's what a national credit system has to ensure. Water. I mentioned the drought, the spreading drought. Fresh water is critical. We have, I mentioned it before, the per capita water consumption in the United States has been dropping for 5 decades because we're not developing the water systems required, inland and also coastal. We obviously need desalination plants up and down the West Coast, nuclear desalination, but other projects, large water projects, also flood control and surge protection. We're just standing wide open down here on the Gulf Coast. It's like 40% or so of the entire refinery capacity of the United States is here in the Houston area, and a storm surge could wipe that all out, a big hurricane storm surge. So a lot has to be done in terms of infrastructure in this country. But so energy, water, fresh water, and water management, and labor force. Those are the 3 that I would underscore. If we're seriously thinking about the future of our economy, we've got to train up new generations of productive workers, skilled workers, workers capable of advancing their own skills, machine tools, machinists, machine tool operators, tool and die, electrical engineers, welders. Welding is not a simple thing anymore. Working with nanofibers, working with advanced metal alloys, and so on and so forth. This is the future for our country, but that workforce has to be trained up through the private sector apprenticeship programs, but also with a national effort to rebuild. We've proposed it as a space CCC modeled on the CCC of the 1930s, but not necessarily sending kids out to the woods, but linking them up with infrastructure projects such as rail. It's another feature. We're going to have to expand the rail system of the United States, high speed for people, but immediately, I would say critically, in terms of freight, we've got to move a lot more freight internally, not just to import, but internally to build up these supply chains, to build up manufacturing and so on and so forth. I want to come back briefly to another feature of, and Susan already mentioned it briefly, another impact of these sanctions policies, cascading on top of the other elements which I mentioned. All of it resting on this cancerous central banking system. All of the rest just compounded. But I want to come back to the impact of this, all of this on the US dollar. The sanctions policy, including freezing the some $200-300 billion in foreign exchange held by the Russian central bank, is again an example of where the dollar is being weaponized and utilized against other countries. This is not the first example of this. We've seen this with Iran and North Korea, and the list could, Venezuela, the list could go on. Other countries are recognizing what this means. This was obviously on the mind of President Xi Jinping of China in this phone conversation yesterday with the avatar Joe Biden, or hologram, or whatever you want to think of him as. But this is the context in which, as I said, the Eurasian Economic Union and China are now preparing, from early reports, we'll see how this plays out, some kind of regional new currency block, a new settlement system going outside of the dollar, centered around the ruble and, of course, yuan of China. So this, what's happening here? A whole part of the world is moving out from under the dollar-based monetary system, the monetarist system of the City of London and so forth, the oligarchical system, potentially. We'll see how this plays out. But think about it. Over the recent decades, the US has pumped out on the order of $12-14 trillion out into the world. These, whether they're energy traders or buyers or government funds for the banks of the central banks of various countries, they've been willing to sell their goods, and what they've gotten from us is simply money, dollar bills, Federal Reserve notes, actually, right? Or even an electronic notation thereof. So we've been getting a tremendous flow of physical goods into the United States over recent decades, and paying for it simply by printing or electronically transferring paper or Federal Reserve notes abroad. Now, what happens when that ends? What happens if the dollar begins to collapse because people want out? 60% of foreign reserves are held in dollars. Well, after the freezing of the Central Bank of Russia, many countries are wondering whether they really want to have their money in US treasuries, which is what that means. So the impact on this, think about it. If the dollar is devalued 25%, 50%, you name it, well, then what's the cost of every import from China or anywhere else? What's the cost of that? And without a productive capacity in the United States to produce these things ourselves, where are we? So this rapidly evolving crisis, this rapidly evolving war, where President Trump says put America first, President Putin of Russia is saying he is putting Russia first, other countries likewise acting against a common oligarchical foe. Can we, out of, say, a new regional currency block, create a new fixed exchange rate system? Can we go to a new system of international credit based on sovereign nation states and sovereign national banking systems, full set economies around the world. That's the direction we have to move in. We can. Another way of thinking about it is well, let me just leave it there. I think I've covered a lot of ground, probably raised a lot of questions, hopefully. We can put this country back together again. We have it in our political DNA. We have the political movement of Trump, of MAGA, of LaRouche PAC and its program. And we've got to be about the job of getting this done, and done in 2022 and completed in 2024. So let me stop there, Susan.